She ruined his $1,000 suit with a spilled coffee. He shattered her ordinary life with a single offer. But neither of them expected the fallout. Would feel like fate. Isla Bennett didn't ask to be noticed. She was invisible, another overworked assistant. Buried dreams. Forgotten talent. But when the city's most powerful billionaire locked eyes with her across a rain-soaked street, everything changed. He offered her a seat at his table. Creative control. A chance to prove herself. All she had to do was say yes, and risk losing everything that made her herself. Was it mentorship or manipulation, a lifeline or a leash? And when ambition turns into something far more dangerous, will she still walk away before it's too late? Or will she finally admit she doesn't want to? This is a story about power, perception, and the one question that changes everything. If I succeed, will it be because of me or because of you? If you've ever been torn between pride and possibility, between protecting your heart and finally letting someone in, then this story was made for you. Please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories for more unforgettable moments and emotional journeys. Now, let's begin. The rain came quietly that morning in the heart of Eastbridge, soft but persistent, draping the city in a curtain of mist. The skyline disappeared into a blur of silver, except for one building, a sharp-edged tower of glass that cut through the haze like a symbol of control. It belonged to Graham Whitmore, a man whose name carried the weight of empires. From the top floor, Graham's voice cut through the silence of his minimalist penthouse. Make sure the Danforth deal is done before lunch. I do not want to hear about delays. His steps echoed with authority on the polished wood floor as he paced, speaking into a headset. He was dressed immaculately, his expression unreadable. At 42, Graham had become one of the most formidable figures in global finance, not just for his uncanny business sense, but for his refusal to tolerate anything less than perfection. The moment he entered the sleek town car waiting below, he resumed scanning his messages. Each tap of his fingers sent waves through someone's life. Somewhere someone hired, someone fired, someone saved. Just before they reached the business district, the driver's voice broke through. "Sir, there has been a pileup ahead. Traffic is stalled for several blocks. Find another path." Graham replied sharply, eyes still locked on his screen. "There is no way around. Everything's backed up. We are stuck." Graham's lips pressed into a line. He glanced at his watch, a custom-made timepiece from Geneva. Discreet, yet worth more than most apartments in the city. "I will walk." "But sir, the rain." The door clicked shut behind him. No further discussion. Graham stepped into the drizzle without hesitation. His coat absorbed the weather like a challenge. The world could soak him if it dared. He would still arrive on time. He had made it only a few blocks when the unexpected happened. At the corner near a construction site stood a small mobile cafe, and stepping out from behind it was a young woman, her arms carefully balancing two trays overloaded with steaming coffee cups. She wore an oversized beige raincoat and worn boots, and strands of auburn hair clung to her damp cheeks. Her eyes scanned the street anxiously. Neither of them saw the other coming until it was too late. In one sharp second, heat and liquid collided with Graham's chest. The coffee soaked into his suit, dark and unforgiving. The trays tumbled, paper cups rolled. "Oh no. I am so sorry." Her voice cracked, rushed and honest, as she dropped to gather what she could. Her hands moved quickly, offering napkins, useless though they were. Graham stared at her, stunned not by the spill, but by the unfamiliar feeling of losing control. He opened his mouth slowly. "Do you know what this jacket costs?" Her breath caught. "I can pay for the cleaning," she said quietly, though she already knew how absurd that sounded. He narrowed his eyes. With what pocket change, and then something unexpected, She stopped apologizing. It was an accident, she said simply, standing upright. You were not looking either. There was no trembling in her voice, no panic, just calm defiance. Graham Whitmore, he said, expecting the usual response, a widened eye, a hurried apology, recognition. But all she did was nod, breath still quickened. Well, Mr. Whitmore, I have to go back and get another order now. My boss will not care that a billionaire was in my way. She turned and walked off without a second glance. For a man used to controlling every outcome, the feeling of being dismissed, genuinely dismissed, was unfamiliar. And as the rain slid down the lapels of his ruined suit, Graham stood frozen in the middle of the street, watching her disappear into the gray. He didn't know her name, but for the first time in years, he wanted to. The young woman didn't apologize again. She merely gave a short nod, her voice steady despite the mess between them. Well, Mr. Whitmore, I am already late delivering what is left of this order, and now I have to go back, place it all over again, which will make me even later. Which means, most likely, I will be skipping lunch, again. Her chest rose and fell as she drew a breath to keep calm. So, while I do regret what happened to your clothes, it seems we are both having a rather unfortunate morning. Without waiting for his reply, she knelt quickly to collect the surviving cups, straightened the trays, and disappeared into the rain. Her presence gone as quickly as it had thrown his morning into chaos. Graham stood still. Water slid down his collar, his suit stained and clinging. But what unsettled him most wasn't the mess, it was the way she had looked at him, as if he were just another stranger on the street. By the time he reached Ashcroft Holdings, damp and silent, the lobby staff could barely hide their expressions. His assistant, a young man in a gray blazer, stared at him in disbelief. What happened to you? Graham brushed past him, his voice cool and curt. I want every bit of information you can find on a woman who delivers coffee near Lexington and 44th. Auburn hair, warm eyes, about 5'6". Now. The door to his office slammed shut behind him, cutting the conversation. For the rest of the day, Graham was present in body, but his mind kept returning to that morning, those steady eyes, the note of weariness in her voice, the boldness of someone who had nothing to gain from speaking plainly. He had been spoken to that way only once before, many years ago, and never since. By dusk, a slim file awaited him on his desk. Isla Bennett, 26 years old, graduate of a liberal arts college in Vermont, former intern at several art studios, currently working as an editorial assistant at Brookstone Media, a small publishing house recently acquired ironically by Ashcroft Holdings just a few weeks ago. The coffee runs, it turned out, weren't even part of her job description, just tasks her supervisors tossed at her when no one else would bother. Graham leaned back in his chair. Something flickered in his expression interest. Maybe. A slow, calculating smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. He reached for his phone. Set up a visit to Brookstone tomorrow. No need to announce me? As the evening light faded outside his penthouse windows and the rain finally lifted, Graham Whitmore felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest, a sense of anticipation. He didn't know why the encounter mattered, only that it did. And what Isla Bennett didn't yet realize was that her world was already shifting quietly, steadily, because someone who never noticed anyone had, for the first time in years, truly noticed her. The next morning, Isla rushed into the office with barely half a minute to spare, her damp hair stuck to her cheeks, and her coat still smelled faintly of last night's storm. The coffee spill had cost her more than dry clothes. It had earned her 2 extra hours of punishment duty from her supervisor, Miranda Quinn, who'd made her reorganize the entire company archive as payback. Hey, early riser, called Liam, a graphic designer and perhaps the only person at Brookstone who smiled at her without a reason. Survived Miranda's wrath. Barely, Isla replied, dropping her bag beside her desk. I also had to cancel my meeting with the curator at Fenwick Gallery. Again. Liam's brow furrowed. Isla. That's the third time. Your photography deserves to be seen, not shelved. Her workspace quietly told on her a dusty vintage camera tucked between folders, black and white photos used as coasters, and a tiny calendar marked with landscapes she had captured on weekend hikes. Not all of us get to do what we love, she said softly, starting up her computer. Some of us are just trying to make rent. Before Liam could answer, a voice sharp and unkind cut through the room. Bennett. Isla turned. Miranda stood in the glass office doorway, arms crossed, coffee. And bring me the revised editorial timelines. Now. Isla grabbed her purse, murmured something under her breath, and made her way to the elevator. Just another morning of being invisible to the people she worked for, except maybe one, and he was already on his way. As Isla stepped toward the elevator, she stopped cold. The polished doors slid open, and standing inside, immaculately dressed in a midnight blue suit, was Graham Whitmore, the man from the coffee disaster. Her heart skipped. For a brief second, she considered turning and fleeing back down the hallway, but it was too late. He had already seen her. Miss Bennett, he said evenly, as if they were old acquaintances rather than awkward combatants in a caffeine collision. You remember my name? She said, stepping in slowly. Her voice was calm, but her thoughts were spiraling. I never forget people who leave an impression, especially on my clothes, Graham replied, a faint trace of irony lacing his words. Isla pressed the button for the lobby, trying to ignore how her pulse quickened in the silence. If it helps, I got chewed out yesterday, pretty badly. Not that someone like you would know what that feels like. He raised a brow. You mean being reprimanded? No. I mean having a boss who treats you like you're disposable. The elevator hummed as it descended. Isla couldn't bring herself to look directly at him, but she felt the weight of his gaze. When the doors opened, she stepped out quickly, her feet carrying her away from the quiet tension inside. Actually, he called after her, his voice breaking the quiet. I'm here to meet with your boss. She turned back slowly, her brows drawing together. Miranda. Or do you mean Mr. Carlyle? The color drained from her face before he could reply. Everyone at Brookstone Media had known about the acquisition, but no one expected the man behind the deal to walk through the door in person. Not unless something drastic was about to happen. 14th floor, she murmured, then disappeared around the corner to finish her errand. By the time she returned, arms full of fresh coffee carriers, the office had erupted into quiet panic. Desks were being hastily tidied, personal photos shoved into drawers, and browser tabs slammed shut with nervous clicks. He's here, Liam whispered as she passed, handing him his drink. He's in Carlyle's office right now. 30 minutes and counting. I saw him in the elevator, Isla confessed, still feeling the heat of it in her chest. And you live to tell the tale. I hear he liquidates entire departments before lunch. Before she could reply, Miranda appeared. Her usual composure rattled. Bennett, Mr. Carlyle wants to see you now. Me. Why, Isla nearly dropped the coffee in her hands. How should I know? Just go. Leave the rest here. The walk to the corner office felt like a sentencing. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, Isla could see Mr. Carlyle standing beside the tall, unshakable figure of Graham Whitmore, who appeared as relaxed and unreadable as ever. She knocked once, then stepped inside. Ah, Isla, Carlyle said too brightly. Mr. Whitmore was just inquiring about some of our junior team members, specifically those in administrative roles. Graham turned toward her, eyes steady. We've met, he said calmly. Carlyle looked between them. clearly confused. You have. She certainly stood out, Graham added, though his expression gave nothing away. Isla braced herself. Here it comes. The public recounting of her clumsiness, the humiliation, the professional consequences. But instead of calling attention to the spilled coffee, Graham spoke with cool precision. I'm conducting a broad assessment of creative resources across our recent acquisitions. Miss Bennett, if I'm not mistaken. You have training in the visual arts. Isla blinked. Yes. Photography. But I mostly handle office logistics here. A misallocation of talent, he said without hesitation. Brookstone's visual content is outdated. I need someone with a clearer eye to reassess the direction of our design strategies. Carlyle shifted uncomfortably. We do have a team for that. That team has delivered the same recycled ideas for the past 5 years, Graham said. I'm not interested in repetition. I'm interested in vision. And Isla, still standing by the door, suddenly realized this was not about punishment. It was something else entirely. Carlyle's expression faltered. Sir, we already have a full marketing division. They've been handling our brand visuals for years. Exactly, Graham said, slicing through the excuse. Miss Bennett will report directly to me until this assessment concludes. Isla blinked, her thoughts scrambling to keep up. She had braced herself for reprimand. Not this. I'm not sure I understand. It's simple, Graham replied, reaching into his inner pocket. He handed her a pale gray card. Her name wasn't on it, but a private number was scrawled across the back. You begin tomorrow. My office, 9 o'clock sharp, but Miranda has me scheduled for Miranda will cope, he said, tone final. Unless you are not interested in making real use of your actual talent. And just like that, it was there laid out like a line she had always dreamed of crossing. The very thing she had pushed to the margins of her life, her photography, her eye, her way of seeing the world. A doorway opened by a man she barely knew, a man who had once looked at her soaked and stained with coffee. I'm interested, she said, cautious but unable to keep the flicker of hope from her voice. Good. Graham turned back to Carlyle. That's all I need. He left the office without another word, his long coat sweeping behind him like a shadow. Through the glass partition, Isla caught Miranda's gaze. There was something in the older woman's eyes now, something calculating and sharp. Whatever Graham Whitmore had just done, it had shifted the gravity of Isla's life, and it wouldn't be without consequence. That evening, in his penthouse overlooking Eastbridge Harbor, Graham sat alone with a tablet in hand. Isla's photography portfolio, quietly obtained through his assistant, glowed on the screen. Her work wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was raw, honest, human. Photos of strangers on subways, sunbeams breaking through alleyways, children chasing shadows in parks. There was no manipulation, no polish, no branding, and that's precisely why he couldn't stop looking. He poured a glass of scotch and leaned back in his leather chair. He had made decisions all his life, some in seconds, some calculated for years. But this one had come from somewhere he couldn't quite identify. For the first time in a long while, it wasn't a merger or a market that held his attention. It was a woman who had told him the truth. His phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number. This is Isla Bennett. What's the real reason you gave me this job? He stared at the words, then typed back. Slowly. Come in tomorrow and ask me again. The next morning. Isla stood in the towering lobby of Whitmore Holdings, feeling both too visible and too small. Her old leather portfolio felt heavy in her arms, more like armor than art. The space was breathtaking glass, light, and movement in every direction. Everyone looked like they belonged, everyone but her. Miss Bennett, a receptionist approached, crisp and courteous. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. Top floor. Here's your elevator pass. The elevator opened silently, and she stepped inside. As the numbers climbed, so did the tightness in her chest. Why her? Why now? What if this was a mistake? What if it wasn't? The elevator doors opened into a space unlike anything she had known. Wide, minimal, beautiful in its restraint. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city, gleaming in the new morning light. Graham stood facing the glass, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was composed, but sharp. I'm not interested in shareholder opinions. The Cairo transaction concludes today. If it doesn't, someone else will. He ended the call without ceremony and turned toward her. Isla couldn't read his expression. Not entirely. You're 2 minutes early, he said. I operate 5 minutes ahead of panic, she replied, surprised at herself. Graham's lips lifted just barely. A flicker, a shift. Then come in, Miss Bennett, he said. Let's see if we can turn that instinct into something worth keeping. He ended the call with a clipped motion, offering no goodbye, and turned to face her. For just a heartbeat. Graham's features relaxed, barely noticeable, but enough for Isla to catch a glimpse of the man behind the mask. Then, as quickly as it came, the softness was gone. You are 3 minutes late, he said flatly. Isla glanced at her watch. Actually, I'm 2 minutes early. I set my time 5 minutes fast. Keeps me on my toes. There was a flicker at the corner of his mouth almost, but not quite. A smile. A habit like that might make you irritating, or extremely successful. I've been called both, Isla replied, and immediately wished she hadn't. But instead of reprimand, Graham looked amused. Tell me something. Miss Bennett, is it your habit to speak your mind with everyone, or am I simply the lucky exception? Isla placed her portfolio on the glass desk, her fingers brushing its worn edge. I believe in being honest, she said quietly, especially when I have nothing to lose. Graham stepped closer, his gaze moving to the leather-bound folio. May I? She nodded, uncertain, watching as he opened it with care. He moved through the pages, slowly pausing, not rushing, absorbing. His fingertips hovered over one particular photo, an older couple, caught mid-dance in a quiet park at dawn. Their joy was unposed, their faces weathered and full of memory, caught in the warmth of first light. This, he said, after a long silence, is not ordinary. Isla's breath caught. Thank you, she said, her voice softer. Most commercial work our current campaigns included feels hollow. Yours doesn't. It breathes. He closed the portfolio gently. That's why you're here. I find that hard to believe. Why? Because billionaires don't typically recruit people who spill coffee on them for strategic projects. Perhaps I'm not a typical billionaire, Graham said, leaning against the edge of the desk. Everything about this place suggests otherwise, Isla said, gesturing toward the high windows and curated art. That made him laugh genuinely. A low, unexpected sound that seemed to surprise even him. Fair observation, he admitted. Let's just say I know talent when I see it, especially when it's being wasted. Over the next hour, the atmosphere shifted. Graham laid out his vision for revamping Brookstone's visual identity. To her own surprise, Isla found herself drawn into the conversation, not just nodding, but debating, suggesting, even challenging him on creative points. The nervous tension from earlier faded into something else entirely. You'll need access to our upcoming releases, Graham said finally, handing her a sleek black tablet. Everything's preloaded internal drafts, marketing projections, competitor analyses. Treat it as confidential. You're trusting me with this. Trust is temporary, he said. Consider this your trial period. As the meeting wound down, Isla's phone buzzed again and again. She glanced at the screen, dozens of messages from Miranda. each one more aggressive than the last. Graham noticed. Trouble. My supervisor's not thrilled that I've disappeared from her radar, Isla admitted. Miranda Quinn, Graham murmured, scrolling through something on his own device. Hired 7 years ago. Promoted steadily despite underwhelming performance. Curious. You have access to internal files. I own the building, Miss Bennett, and the company. I have access to whatever I choose. The ease with which he said it, so casual, so absolute, sent a chill through her. For all the flashes of warmth and insight, he was still a man accustomed to power, to control, to people bending. I should get back, she said, reaching for her bag. Miranda's expecting me. No. The word stopped her like a wall. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision. Excuse me. You work for me now, Graham said calmly, each word clipped with authority. Exclusively. I've already spoken to Carlyle. Whatever flicker of admiration Isla had felt minutes earlier dissolved instantly. You can't just declare that I wasn't even asked? I didn't realize I needed your permission, he said, his tone cool and composed. That's not how people operate, she snapped. You don't get to rewire someone's life on a whim just because you're tired of boardrooms and buyouts. I'm offering you something most creatives only dream of, he countered, clearly surprised by her resistance. You're offering me a golden cage, Isla said, voice rising. And I never agreed to be caged no matter how beautiful the offer. They stood locked in silence, he, unyielding, she, unafraid. For perhaps the first time in his life, Graham Whitmore faced someone who didn't need wealth, status, or influence to match his will. Someone who stood eye to eye without armor. What do you want? Isla. The question caught her mid-breath. What if you could have anything professionally, what would it be? She paused, not out of doubt, but because no one had ever truly asked her that. A gallery show, she said. My own exhibition. Real space. Real light. Real people seeing my work. Graham nodded. Slowly. 6 weeks. What's 6 weeks? You help reimagine Brookstone's entire visual strategy. From the ground up. If you succeed, I'll secure you a solo show. Anywhere in the city. And I'll pay you 3 times what you're earning now. Her heart thudded. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was everything she had ever wanted. You're serious. I never joke when it comes to terms, Graham said simply. Isla felt the weight of the moment settle over her like warm fog. The doubts were still there, whispering. He was unpredictable, unreadable, uncomfortably powerful, but the dream dangled too close to ignore. Fine, she said at last, but I set my own hours. Agreed. I keep full creative control. Agreed. And you don't treat me like an employee. To that, Graham offered a half smile. You're under contract, and I always treat my contractors fairly. No, I'm not one of your chess pieces. Noted, he said, though something glinted in his eyes. Challenge, amusement, or maybe both. Isla picked up her bag. Every step toward the door weighted with the sense that she had just made a deal with the kind of man who could alter trajectories with a single look. That night, in the quiet of his penthouse, Graham ignored 3 urgent meeting requests and pored over Isla's work again. His assistant, Julian, glanced in as he passed, then stopped short. You've been at that for over an hour. Graham didn't look up. She sees people, he murmured. Really sees them. Julian arched an eyebrow. If you say so. The Denver property deal is still waiting on your input. Not now. Graham waved him off, eyes still fixed on a photograph of a man hunched beneath a bridge, breaking his sandwich in half for a scruffy dog. The image was sharp, but tender, quiet, human. When had someone last looked at him that way? When had he last looked at someone really looked, and not just seen a transaction, His phone buzzed. Isla, I've gone through your files. They lack soul. We're starting over. 10 tomorrow. Bryant Park. Wear something that won't scare pedestrians. Graham chuckled, actually. Chuckled. Nobody ever told him what to wear. Until now. He replied to her text with practiced indifference. I don't do casual. Her response came almost instantly. Then I don't do this project. For the second time in a single day. Graham laughed aloud, without restraint. It was unfamiliar, unsettling, and oddly refreshing. He did not frequent public parks. And he certainly did not spend mid-morning on a weekday sitting on benches under trees when he was supposed to be closing a billion-dollar logistics deal with East Asia. Yet here he was, 10 o'clock sharp, in Everleigh Park, dressed in what his assistant had assured him was relaxed but polished, dark denim that likely cost more than the average rent in the city, and a charcoal sweater that had never known a washing machine. He checked his watch again, 3 times in 5 minutes. No sign of her. Just as he reached for his phone, he spotted her. She was weaving through the path between food stalls and early joggers, her camera slung over one shoulder. Isla walked differently than the others, slow, deliberate, scanning the world like it held secrets she might catch if she looked long enough. Her jeans were well worn, her jacket vintage and weather-soft. A scarf in sapphire blue danced behind her in the breeze. She spotted him, tilted her head. You actually came, she said, as if genuinely unsure he would. I said I would, didn't I? He stood as she approached. But I'm still not clear on why this meeting couldn't happen in an actual office with heating and coffee. Because offices don't tell stories, she answered, adjusting the lens of her camera. And Brookstone publishes stories? I need to see how you exist in the world, not just behind glass walls. I don't exist in the world, he said. I direct it. Exactly the problem. Before he could retort, she lifted her camera and snapped quick, instinctive. Don't do that. Why not? I don't appreciate being photographed without consent. She lowered her camera but didn't apologize. Control issues. Practicality, he replied. Every image of me becomes public currency. Dissected, misused, misread. There was something in his tone, not arrogance this time, but something quieter. Isla studied him. You've made yourself into a fortress. He didn't answer. Fine, no surprises. But I need real moments, Graham, not curated ones. Otherwise, this whole project is just another campaign that means nothing. They began walking. The conversation drifted from composition to philosophy, from branding to reader psychology. Isla shared her vision how she wanted to show real people reading, connecting, losing themselves in fiction. She wanted emotion, texture, stillness, not gloss. To her surprise, Graham didn't argue. In fact, he built on her ideas, suggesting market angles, audience responses, digital engagement patterns. They were opposites, and yet, it worked. 2 hours later, they hadn't noticed the time. I need coffee, Isla announced. Actual coffee. Not whatever diamond-dusted espresso you probably drink from a silver straw. Graham allowed a small smile. Simple black. No sugar. No way. A billionaire with working-class taste. That I have to see. They stopped at a modest coffee stand tucked under a line of rustling trees, not the same cart where everything had begun, but comfortingly ordinary. Isla pulled out a few crumpled bills from her coat pocket. My project, my treat, she said, firmly waving off the platinum card Graham instinctively reached for. He didn't argue. For once, it felt good to let someone else lead. They found a quiet bench beneath the amber shade of a tree. As the steam curled from their cups, neither spoke. It wasn't awkward, just full of something unspoken. Then Graham noticed her lift her camera again. She focused on a little girl sitting on a bench nearby, reading to her worn-out stuffed rabbit, as the child threw her head back in laughter. Isla clicked. One perfect moment, forever captured. "You're good with people," he said. "I'm interested in people," she corrected gently. "There's a difference." "How so?" She thought before answering. "Most photographers try to control everything: the pose, the setting, the story. I'd rather wait. Let people forget I'm there. The real moments are quieter, but they speak louder." "Patient," Graham murmured. "Not something I encounter often. No. I imagine most people scramble to give you what you want before you've even finished asking." His lips lifted faintly. "Sarcasm observation," she replied. "But I'd guess it gets lonely." The words landed heavier than she intended. Graham didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "Being surrounded isn't the same as being seen." Before Isla could respond, her phone buzzed. One look at the screen, and her entire energy shifted. She stood. "I need to take this." He watched her walk a few paces away, voice low and tense. Though he couldn't hear the words, he saw the slump in her shoulders, the way her hand trembled as she held the phone. When she returned, something had changed. "Is everything all right? Fine," she said automatically, then exhaled. "Not really. My landlord just told me my building's being sold. They're turning it into luxury condos. I have about 2 months to find a new place." "Tough timing. That's Eastbridge," she replied, trying to sound light. "A game of musical chairs, except the music stops faster when you don't come with a family trust." Graham felt something strange stir in him, the urge to fix it, to buy the building, to offer her a place, any place. The impulse shocked him. Instead, he said carefully, "The salary increase should help. Somewhat, maybe," Isla said, gathering her things. "I have a few leads. I should check them out. We're not finished. I have enough to start sketching ideas. I'll send drafts tomorrow." She stood, ready to go. Dinner. Isla paused. "Dinner. To discuss the project. Further. I don't think that's necessary." "That wasn't a request." "Miss Bennett?" "There it is," she said, lips tightening. "The version of you I expected all along, the one who commands instead of asks." "Force of habit," he admitted. "Break it," she replied. "Try being human." He looked at her, as if seeing her through the lens she so often used on others. Vulnerable, real. It disarmed him more than it should have. "Would you like to have dinner with me, Isla?" To talk more about the project. The question lingered between them, honest, without armor. For a moment, her expression softened. "I can't tonight, but I'm free tomorrow. On one condition: nothing extravagant." "Define nothing extravagant," he asked, half a smile forming. She grinned. "If there's a dress code or a waiting list, it's too much. If the place has a dress code or a month-long wait list, it's too fancy. A challenge, but one I accept." Graham replied, oddly pleased that she hadn't turned him down. That evening, as his car moved silently through the city, he found himself staring out the window, completely ignoring the unopened financial brief resting in his lap. His mind, for once, wasn't preoccupied with projections or mergers. He was thinking about Isla Bennett. She didn't look at him the way most people did, not with admiration, not with fear, but with curiosity, sharp, thoughtful, unsentimental. It was disarming. His phone buzzed. First drafts attached. "Also, if you're serious about dinner, there's a great Thai spot in my neighborhood. Plastic chairs. Incredible food. Absolutely no pretense." Graham blinked at the message, unsure what unsettled him more, the idea of plastic chairs or the fact that he was genuinely intrigued. A second text arrived. "Unless you're too afraid to step into Brooklyn." He couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't mockery, it was surprise. delight. Even, I'll need the address. My team has to vet the location. Moments later, her reply, it's a restaurant. Graham, not a military outpost. Another message followed his way. Softer. Please. Just one word. But it shifted something in the air. Back in her small Brooklyn apartment, Isla dropped onto her second-hand couch, staring at her phone in disbelief. Had she really spent her day with a billionaire and invited him to her favorite hole-in-the-wall eatery? What was happening? She glanced around at the tiny space she called home. Every wall was covered in photographs, street scenes, sunlight through fire escapes, quiet faces mid-thought. It wasn't luxury, but it was hers. In 2 months, she would have to pack it all away. Her phone lit up. Send the address. And yes, my security will still check. She rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress the grin. Maybe the arrogant CEO could learn how to be a person. After all. Later, while reviewing her images from the day, Isla paused on one frame, Graham standing at the edge of the park, watching a street performer with a group of laughing children. He hadn't known she was photographing him. His face was unguarded, soft, almost wistful. She didn't know what it meant, whether it was a flicker of something real or just another side of a very complicated man. What she did know was this: their 6-week deal was quickly becoming something far less predictable. The next evening, Isla sat at a corner table in Bangkok kitchen, nervously adjusting the faded tablecloth. The mismatched chairs squeaked every time someone shifted. Old photographs of Thailand covered the walls, and the smell of lemongrass and chili filled the air. It was the kind of place where no one rushed you, where the owners knew your name, where memories clung to the worn fabric of the booths. He's not coming, she muttered, checking her watch for the 3rd time. 20 minutes late. She should have known. Just as she reached for her phone to type a graceful exit, a hush fell over the room, heads turned, a ripple of quiet confusion. Then he appeared, Graham Whitmore, in dark jeans and a fitted navy jacket, looking alarmingly polished amid cracked tiles and paper menus. 2 security men lingered at the door, scanning the room with professional detachment. Seriously, Isla hissed as he approached. You brought bodyguards to Bangkok Garden? They'll wait outside, Graham replied smoothly, sliding into the seat across from her, a gesture of compromise, if nothing else. Before Isla could respond, a petite elderly woman emerged from the kitchen, her eyes lighting up as she took in Graham's perfectly pressed coat and movie star bone structure. Your friend very handsome, she whispered to Isla with absolutely no subtlety. Special menu tonight. Isla flushed crimson. Just the usual. Mrs. Suwan. Thank you. As the woman shuffled back toward the kitchen with a pleased smile, Graham raised an eyebrow. The usual, I come here often, Isla said with a small shrug. It's 2 blocks from my place. They let me sit here for hours editing without making me order more than a cup of tea. Charitable of them. Kind, she corrected. Not the same thing. He glanced around. Mismatched chairs, worn floors, faded portraits of Thai temples hanging slightly askew on the walls. The air was thick with lemongrass and something sweet. This isn't where I would have guessed you'd bring someone. Where would you have guessed? Somewhere a little more curated, artistic, maybe. On my income, she laughed. This is luxury, bohemian luxury. Before he could answer, Mrs. Suwan returned with 2 glasses of Thai iced tea, setting them down with a knowing smile. On the house, special guest. As she disappeared, Graham leaned in, his voice lower. Are we actually here to talk about the project, or was that just the excuse his directness threw her? Isla blinked, reaching instinctively for her tablet. I have some concepts ready. Yes, Isla, he said, gently interrupting her. His use of her first name slowed her down more than the words themselves. I don't usually take meetings in places with plastic tables, and I definitely don't do them in Brooklyn. And I don't usually sit across from billionaires who think $60 for coffee is acceptable, she shot back. Yet here we are. Here we are. He echoed, a quiet grin surfacing. And somehow, for the next hour, the project faded into the background. Isla told him about her childhood in a small Pennsylvania town, about the dusty Nikon her grandfather left her when she was 11, how she used to take portraits of sunlit laundry lines and neighborhood dogs, how she moved to Eastbridge with $300 and a suitcase full of photographs, hoping it would be enough. Graham shared, too, but carefully, sanitized stories about business, early deals, mistakes made and empires grown. But Isla noticed he avoided anything personal. You're very skilled at answering questions without actually saying anything, she noted as their food arrived. Force of habit, he replied, not denying it. Journalists tend to weaponize details. I'm not a journalist, Isla said. I'm just curious. Something in her tone gentle, non-threatening, seemed to unlock something. My parents died when I was 12, Graham said quietly. Car accident. I was raised by my grandfather, brilliant businessman, not built for parenting. He taught me how to read a balance sheet before I knew how to ask for help. Isla said nothing. She didn't need to. I'm sorry. Don't be. It shaped me. I sometimes wonder what else it shaped me away from. And who are you? Now, she asked softly. When no one's looking. When the magazines and cameras go quiet. The question startled him. No one had asked it in a very long time. Before he could answer, her phone buzzed on the table. Sorry. It's about an apartment I was going to view tomorrow. She stepped outside to take the call, pacing near the window. Graham watched her through the glass, her hands animated, her brow creased. No pretense, just truth, visible in every movement. There was something compelling about her lack of armor. When she returned, her shoulders were heavier. Bad news, he asked. Gone. Someone rented it earlier today. That's the third place this week. At this point, I might end up living in my dark room. At this rate, I'll be living in a storage unit by Christmas. Graham opened his mouth before thinking. I could help. Isla froze mid-sip, her eyes narrowing. I'm not looking for a savior. Mr. Whitmore. That's not what I meant. He started, then paused, realizing how easily it could be misunderstood. I own a few residential buildings. Some of them have available units. Normal ones. No penthouses. No strings. Absolutely not. Why? Because I keep my work separate from favors. It blurs lines that are hard to redraw once crossed. Graham was surprised at how sharply her refusal stung. And what lines are we drawing here? Isla. The question lingered, charged with a quiet tension neither of them dared name aloud. She took her time before answering, sipped her tea, held his gaze. Professional ones. 6 weeks. Then we go back to our own orbits. What if I don't want to? He hadn't meant to say it aloud, but the words came anyway, unguarded, like a truth he'd been holding in too long. Isla's expression shifted, her breath catching just slightly. But before she could answer, the door rattled. The sudden flicker of flashbulbs cut through the restaurant like lightning. Outside the window, photographers had gathered, lenses pressed against the glass, a familiar face caught in an unfamiliar place. How did they find us? Someone recognized me, Graham muttered, already on his feet. It happens more than you'd think. His security team moved fast, guiding them through the narrow kitchen, past pots of simmering broth and startled chefs. They exited through a rear alley, where a sleek black car waited like a shadow. "Get in," he said as the sound of hurried footsteps and shouted names grew behind them. "I live just around the corner," Isla protested. "I'll be fine." "They'll follow you," Graham said tightly. "And trust me, you don't want them knowing where you sleep." Reluctantly, she slid into the back seat. The door shut with a quiet thud that somehow felt too final. As the car pulled away, she caught a glimpse of the chaos they left behind. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks, predatory, relentless. "I'm sorry," Graham said. His jaw clenched. "This wasn't what tonight was supposed to be. Is this normal for you?" "Often enough," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Privacy's rare. Even money can't buy silence." They drove through the quiet streets of Brooklyn, then over the bridge into Manhattan. The windows blurred with city light, the hum of traffic soft in the distance. Between them, the space had shifted less tension, more weight. Isla turned to him. "You never answered my question. Which one who are you beneath the billion-dollar exterior?" Graham looked at her. In the low light of the car, something in his face softened. "I'm not sure I remember." It was the honesty of it that hit her hardest. No charm, no spin, just truth. Without speaking, she reached into her bag and pulled out her camera. "May I?" He hesitated, then nodded once. She adjusted for the lighting, framed him in that moment, not the businessman, not the public figure, but the man who didn't know who he was anymore. She clicked the shutter, unguarded, caught between identities. Human. "What will you do with that photo?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Something shifted. A breath held between them seemed to exhale. A wall quietly, undeniably fell. His hand found hers where it rested on the seat between them, and for a moment, she didn't pull away. "Where to?" Sir, the driver asked through the intercom, reality breaking in like a draft of cold air. Isla withdrew her hand gently, as if waking from something she hadn't meant to feel so deeply. "My place," Graham said, then glanced toward her. "We can continue the conversation. In peace." The words weren't aggressive, but they weren't neutral either. They carried possibilities, carefully couched in professional tones neither of them truly believed. "I should go home," she said, though even she could hear the wavering in her voice. "The press might still be outside your building," he replied. "My place has a private entrance. Just coffee. Talk about the next steps." They both knew the next steps had little to do with visual strategy, but the excuse was a useful shield. "Just coffee," Isla said, ignoring the voice inside her, reminding her that nothing involving Graham Whitmore was ever just anything. As the car turned toward the high rises of Midtown, Graham's phone lit up with a call from his assistant. He declined it. The motion was simple, but it wasn't small. He was beginning to understand that little decisions, ignored calls, altered routes, held hands might end up changing everything. And Isla Bennett might be the beginning of something he hadn't known he was missing. 5 weeks had passed since that rainy morning when Isla's tray of coffee collided with Graham's $10,000 suit and altered both of their trajectories. Their 6-week contract was nearly complete, and Brookstone Media's rebranding was already being hailed as a quiet revolution. Isla's raw, emotionally honest photography had breathed new life into the company's image, making it resonate in ways spreadsheets never could. But none of that compared to the quiet, complicated connection that had taken root between them. Now Isla stood inside the high-ceilinged halls of the Whitney Museum, surrounded by her own photographs. The light had been arranged perfectly to cradle each frame in reverence. It was happening, her solo exhibition, the promise Graham had made and kept. "Nightlight," she whispered, running a hand over the printed poster bearing her name in sharp white letters. "I still can't believe this is real." "You earned every inch of it," Graham said from behind her. She turned to find him watching her, not just her work, but her. The gallery director said your photos are the most affecting she's seen in years. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. Strategy sessions turned into long conversations. Late-night layout reviews turned into quiet dinners, and those turned into unspoken moments that hovered between them. And that night at his penthouse, the one that had started with tension and ended in nothing more than coffee and silence, they had stayed on opposite ends of the sofa. But the air between them had been thick with almost. Neither had dared define what was growing between them. Until now. Isla, Graham said, stepping closer. His voice lacked its usual confidence. It held something more fragile. We need to talk. About what happens. After next week. Her heart tightened. Next week. The end of their agreement. The moment their defined window would close. The point at which they were supposed to return to their separate worlds. Back to control. Back to distance. Back to pretending it hadn't meant more. I know. Isla said quietly, turning away from him and toward the nearest frame on the wall. Her voice was even, but her hands had tightened by her sides. I've been thinking about it too. Before Graham could respond, her phone buzzed again, another call from her real estate agent. She stepped away, her face unreadable as she answered. He watched her from across the gallery, feeling the invisible thread stretch between them. When she returned, her expression said it all. No luck. She shook her head. 6 weeks of searching. Still nothing. My application fell through again. And I'm running out of time. How long? 2 weeks. Then I have to be out. And if something doesn't come through soon, I might have to leave East Bridge altogether. The thought struck him with sudden force. Isla leaving. Isla vanishing from his days like she had never existed in them. After all they had built, spoken and unspoken, it felt like watching something rare slip through his fingers. Come live with me, he said, the words escaping before reason could catch them. Her eyes widened. What not? Like that, Graham added quickly. Though his tone didn't quite match his explanation. I have a guest cottage. On my property in Connecticut. Separate. Private. It's yours if you want it. You can commute into the city. No strings. No rent. Her face softened. But her guard didn't lower. Graham, I'm not trying to control you, he said, more urgently now. I'm trying not to lose you. The rawness in his voice startled even himself. He, who had always measured his words like currency, now laid them down unguarded, unsure of their value, but praying they mattered. She looked at him, and for a moment he thought she might say yes, but then came the truth she couldn't ignore. I can't, she said softly. Not like this. Like what like this? Isla gestured to the room around them. This exhibition, my name on the walls, my career finally opening up, all of it, tied to you. And if I take your offer, how will I ever know if I made it because I earned it or because I was standing in your orbit? Graham stepped forward, his frustration flickering to the surface. Why does it matter how the door opened, as long as you were the one who walked through it, because not everyone gets someone like you to open it? Isla replied. And I didn't ask for that kind of imbalance. Yes, I have resources you don't, he said, his voice quieting again. But you have something I've never had not until I met you. What's that authenticity? She looked up, surprised. You don't pretend, Isla. You don't bend yourself to fit what people want. And in my world, that kind of honesty is almost extinct. Before she could answer, a sharp voice cut through the moment. Sir, excuse me. It was Julian. Graham's assistant, looking more alarmed than Isla had ever seen him. "We have a situation. The board's called an emergency meeting. Hampton Investments is attempting a hostile takeover. They're accusing you of losing focus, making erratic decisions. Stock's already down 10%. They want answers. Now." Graham's expression hardened in an instant. The CEO resurfaced. "Get the jet ready. I need to be in London tonight." Julian nodded and began calling as he backed away. "So, you're leaving," Isla said. It wasn't a question, just the quiet acknowledgement of what she'd always feared would come. "This is temporary," Graham insisted. "I'll be back before your opening. I promise." "Will you?" she asked. Barely more than a whisper. "Or will something else pull you away? Another fire to put out, another crisis to solve, another reason why real life has to wait." The question held no accusation, just resignation, and that more than anything made it sting, because they both knew it was true. For weeks, they had existed in a fragile cocoon stitched together by late-night conversations and borrowed time, pretending that the chasm between their lives could be crossed with enough willpower and silence. "Come with me," Graham said suddenly. "To London. We can talk this through, figure out what this is together." Isla's heart clenched, but her head remained clear. "That's not my world, Graham. I have a show to prepare, an apartment to find, a life that isn't waiting in the back seat of your jet, a life I've built for myself." The space between them felt wider than ever. Graham checked his watch. It was a reflex, but it said everything his time wasn't fully his own. He stepped forward anyway, cupping her face gently in his hand. "This isn't over. Isla Bennett. Not by a long shot." When he kissed her, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't uncertain. It was quiet and full of meaning, something between a promise and a goodbye. A moment she might one day look back on and wonder if that was the point everything changed, or everything paused. Then he turned and walked away, already speaking into his phone, already solving something that wasn't her, and she stood there, still, alone, surrounded by her photographs, by proof that she had created something lasting. The exhibition would happen with or without him, and that truth stung more than it should have. 2 weeks passed like rain against a window blurred, relentless, half-remembered. Graham called every day from London, but time zones turned warmth into delay. Their conversations were shorter now, shaped by tension and careful hope. The takeover was messier than expected. Board politics, investor anxieties, rumors in the press. His return kept slipping further into the unknown. "I'm trying to get back," he would say. "The exhibition will be fine," Isla would reply. But neither of them believed that was what mattered most. The night of the opening arrived. The gallery swelled with people critics, collectors, photographers Isla had studied since college. Her images glowed under the gallery lights humanity captured in quiet, perfect moments. The reviews were effusive. Praise poured in. 3 publications requested interviews. 5 pieces sold before the second hour. By every standard, it was a triumph. But Isla kept glancing toward the entrance, looking for someone tall, someone who had promised, someone who, despite all the odds, she still wanted to walk through those doors. Her phone remained silent. The last message from Graham had come hours ago. Board meeting, dragging, still trying. As the gallery thinned, Isla stepped outside into the crisp night air. The city had turned colder. Leaves skittered across the pavement. She wrapped her shawl around herself, letting the quiet settle in her chest. She had everything she dreamed of. Almost. A familiar voice broke her thoughts. "The critics are calling you the most compelling new voice in New York photography. Not bad for someone who was delivering coffee just 6 weeks ago." Isla turned. Miranda Quinn. Her former supervisor stood there, coat drawn tightly, eyes sharp. Miranda. I didn't expect you to come. Brookstone sent a delegation. I came for curiosity. She paused. I wanted to see what Whitmore saw in you. Isla didn't flinch. My work speaks for itself. To her surprise, Miranda nodded. It does. There was no sarcasm. Just quiet acknowledgement. I underestimated you. Isla. We all did. The words, simple as they were, landed deeper than she expected. Thank you for coming. When Miranda returned to the gallery, Isla stayed behind on the quiet street, her breath fogging in the cool night air. 6 weeks ago, she had been invisible, just another assistant running errands, clinging to a dream no one seemed to see. Now her photographs hung on the walls of the Whitney. Her name was whispered in art circles, and somehow, impossibly, she had fallen for a man who existed in a different orbit. Love. The word she had avoided even in the privacy of her own thoughts. But there it was, now unspoken, but undeniable. A black car pulled up to the curb, its presence sudden and sleek. Her heart lifted just for a second before settling again. It wasn't him. It was Julian, Graham's assistant, Miss Bennett. He greeted with formal precision. Mr. Whitmore sends his apologies for missing tonight, and he asked me to give you this. He handed her a slim envelope, then returned to the car without another word. Inside, Isla found a key and a folded note in Graham's unmistakable handwriting. Isla. The address is 144 Hawthorne Street, apartment 5B. It's yours. No expectations, no conditions. I purchased the building last month. The top unit was renovated for you. Before you object, this isn't a favor. It's a gesture of belief in a photographer whose eye the world is just beginning to understand. The deed is in your name. I wanted to be there tonight. Marcus showed me everything. Your work is luminous. You are extraordinary, Isla Bennett. With or without my influence, we have unfinished business. When you're ready to continue it on your terms, in your own space, you know how to reach me. Always. Graham. Isla stood frozen on the sidewalk, her fingers curled around the key. It was bold, extravagant, utterly Graham. And yet, it wasn't control. It wasn't about power. He had offered her independence, not as a reward, but as recognition. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. International. Did Julian deliver the key? Don't overthink it. Some people help because they cannot, because they want something. It's a lesson I'm learning. Thanks to you. P.S. Look up. Frowning, Isla lifted her gaze to the digital billboard across the street. The screen flickered, and then her photograph. The portrait she had taken of Graham unguarded in the back seat of his car. Mid-thought, vulnerable and real, now stretched high above the city. Below it, a simple caption in clean white text, Isla Bennett, seeing beneath the surface, now showing at the Whitney Museum. She laughed, an actual sound of disbelief and wonder. A message popped up instantly. Subtle. Whitmore. Very subtle. His reply came seconds later. Subtlety is overrated. Like you said, sometimes honesty matters more. I'm flying back tomorrow. Dinner. Your call, your new place. Or that Thai place with the plastic chairs. She looked up at her photograph glowing against the night, then back at the key in her hand. The key to more than a home. To a chapter she hadn't planned for. To a love that had surprised her. She typed slowly, smiling as she hit send. Let's start with plastic chairs and see where it leads. Some stories deserve to continue, even the ones that begin with spilled coffee and ruined suits. High above the Atlantic, in the quiet luxury of his private jet, Graham Whitmore read Isla's message and smiled. Billionaire. strategist, builder of empires, and now unexpectedly, irreversibly in love. For the first time, the most valuable thing he had wasn't a building, a merger, or a legacy written in numbers. It was the trust, laughter, and fierce heart of a woman who had shown him that some things couldn't be negotiated, they had to be earned. Their story was only just beginning. 1 year later, hold still, Isla instructed, adjusting her camera as Graham rolled his eyes dramatically. We're going to be late, he protested, though he made no move to get off the sofa. She grinned from behind the lens. The great Graham Whitmore, worried about punctuality. Who are you? And what have you done with my boyfriend? He chuckled. But the photo she took caught something else entirely, a softness, unguarded and rare. The year had changed them both. Isla's photography had exploded across the globe, exhibitions in London, Paris, Tokyo. Her mentorship program for young artists had become a beacon of opportunity, funded entirely through the success of her work. Graham had reshaped his company, handing off more power to trusted executives, something the old version of him would have called reckless. But this new rhythm left space for something richer, a life beyond the boardroom. They had found a rhythm neither of them had thought possible. A balance. Isla kept her Brooklyn apartment, though most nights she fell asleep in Graham's penthouse, often with camera gear strewn across his designer furniture. He still ran his empire, but now he vanished for entire weekends, no phone, no meetings, just them. We really should go, he said, glancing at the time. On his wrist was a cheap digital watch Isla had gifted him as a joke. He wore it more often than his collection of Swiss chronometers. She slipped on her wrap and looked over to find him paused near the wall. There, amid a collage of her favorite images, hung a carefully framed memory, a photograph of his once ruined suit, still bearing the faint mark of coffee. A beginning preserved. Second thoughts about being seen with a former coffee girl, she teased gently. He stepped closer, pulling her into him. Only thought I have is how empty my life would be if you hadn't spilled that cup. Technically, you ran into me, she corrected with a smirk. Minor detail, he murmured against her temple. What matters is, we collided. As their car rolled through the glowing night of Eastbridge, Isla leaned into his shoulder, her eyes on the city lights outside. What are you thinking about? Graham asked. Perfect exposure, she said. He looked at her, curious. In photography, it's when light, timing, and subject come together just right. Miss any one piece, and the image falls flat. But when it aligns, it's magic. Graham nodded slowly. And in life, same rules apply, she whispered. Their story had never been a fairy tale, not a billionaire rescuing a struggling artist, not a muse taming a hardened tycoon. It had been something richer, messier, a journey between two people who challenged each other, infuriated each other, and in doing so, made room for something neither expected, love that felt earned, not granted. As the skyline shimmered beyond the window, Isla reached for his hand, fingers intertwining. Some collisions, she thought, really are meant to be, even the ones that begin with coffee stains and closed hearts. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes, it comes in the form of a coffee spill, a glance that lingers too long, or a question that's asked softly but means everything. Graham and Isla's story wasn't about perfection. It was about possibility. About two people from different worlds finding their own rhythm, learning to listen, and daring to choose each other again and again. They didn't fix each other. They grew beside one another. And maybe that's what love really is. If this story touched your heart, let it keep moving. Share it with someone who believes in second chances, or who's still waiting for their own unexpected collision. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that speak to the quiet corners of the soul. Because here, Every story begins with emotion and ends with connection. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay inspired.